Disney Pixar's Elemental is a triumph. It's something that a second-generation immigrant like myself needed to see, and it hit way harder than I thought it would. Being a second-gen immigrant made it really easy to connect with the struggles of the Lumen family instantly. The movie nails the complex themes of family, sacrifice, parental expectations, and individuality with perfection, and in a way that is completely truthful to the immigrant experience. The film is also able to effectively illustrate the issues with an inter-elemental love story between the lead characters Ember and her water counterpart Wade. The differences between the leads, including their upbringing, family, and their own elements, create parallels that we can draw to our own lives. Our cultures, demographics, and families are all different, and being a second-gen immigrant made those parallels even more tangible. The movie starts off with two flame people sailing to a new land. Everything seems big and magical to them. We are directly introduced to immigration in the land, where we see the water people coming first, then the earth, then the air elements. Our two flame people attempt to enter the city, but can't speak the language, and thus are assigned new names, Bernie and Cinder.
Your names? How about we just go with Bernie and Cinder?
The movie already draws specific comparisons to the Asian immigrant experience, where our parents might have had to change their names when entering a new country, losing a part of their identity to create a better life, one of their many sacrifices. We see Bernie and Cinder struggle to adapt to this new place, with the water people becoming unlikable in their eyes because they simply don't get along and are opposites. We even see some examples of xenophobia, as they are rejected from living in water-central areas, and thus they build their own home in an isolated area, a new home for their daughter, Ember. Ember is introduced to the traditions as early as possible, as Bernie and Cinder don't want to lose their way of life to this new world. The Lumens start establishing a community and building a life for themselves with a shop called the Fireplace, which is instantly expected to be Ember's destination. As a kid, she doesn't know any better and continues to follow in the footsteps of her father's dream.
Someday, this shop will all be mine.
When you are ready.
And in my head, this whole movie was going to be Ember trying her best to please her parents to earn the shop, but the story takes a really interesting turn. We now see Ember all grown up and running the shop. She still dreams of owning the shop, but now it's mainly to look after her father, as he is now getting old. She's a classic second-gen immigrant that I can personally relate to, someone who has a lot of parental expectations, which is further amplified by the burdens her parents took to get to this place. Her path was basically written for her when she was a child, and she tries her best to fit into the story that her father wrote for her. We see an interaction between Ember and a customer that illustrates her main conflict.
Just give me one for free!
That's not how this works!
Sometimes customer can be tough. Just take breath and make connection. When you can do that and not lose temper, then you will be ready to take over shop.
I personally thought that her main arc in the film would be her learning to control her anger and temper and getting rid of the flame stereotype here, but the real arc turns out to be way more complex. We see Ember's father getting older and weaker in running the shop. Ember runs to his aid. She wants to end the lifelong struggle of her parents by running the shop on her own, something that a lot of second-gen children inherently want to do. During a sale at the store, Ember loses her cool again and blows up the water pipes, in which we meet Wade, a water dude who literally cannot stop crying and seems to be a more chill, go-with-the-flow type of guy. And to compare, Ember is a hot-headed go-getter who wants to get stuff done. A pretty clear distinction between kids that are raised with immigrant parents and those raised by more Western parents, who might have had it easier growing up. The fact that he cries so much is a very important point, and I think the coolest part of the movie for me, but we'll get to that in a bit. Because of Ember's temper, she risks having the shop being shut down as it doesn't meet company regulations, possibly the biggest fear for her, as everything she's worked for all her life is almost about to be closed down, along with the disappointment and further struggling of her parents if this happens. So Ember runs after Wade into the unknown and makes it to Element City, a place where she quite literally cannot fit in. The city isn't built for her kind, but she still makes it through to stop Wade. She isn't successful, but Wade then decides to help her fix the issue when she communicates the situation with him. Ember returns back and lies to her family about what's happened, telling them that Wade was the one who messed up the pipes. And this struggle that the family goes through reminds them of their earlier issues when immigrating. And so we get some important backstory on why the family left and how they tried so hard to hold on to their roots. Bernie and Cinder were happy in Fireland, with their people in a world that was built for them. They had just started building their lives, but calamity struck and destroyed their shop. and to build a better life, they left their families and home. They held on to the blue flame, which is a symbol of the tradition and roots of their land.
Your father understood. We had to leave everything. Our home. It was the only way to create a better life. It was the last time your father ever saw his family.
This is a story that majority of immigrants can relate to, leaving behind family, friends, and their homes to build a better life for themselves and their future generations. Whether it be due to poverty, the standard of living, or their dreams, every immigrant leaves their home in pursuit of something better. And at the same time, every second-gen immigrant kid knows the experience of hearing this story over and over again, being reminded of the trials and tribulations that their parents took to create a better life for them. In this case, the story pushes Ember to try and fix the problem that she created due to her temper. She could not let her mistakes affect her parents to struggle more than they have already done.
Ashfa, nothing will happen to this shop or the flame again. I promise.
Good daughter.
And so a new journey starts for Ember as she continues going back to Element City and meets Wade again and again. He eventually takes Ember to his boss. And I love how the film accurately depicts how Ember doesn't initially fit in. She isn't from the city and she's used to being around her own people, but Wade fits in perfectly and he is way more socially comfortable, which is an interesting distinction to notice. Ember has a hard time communicating with Gil and lets her temper get the better of her again.
Say Cloud Puffs one more time.
Cloud Puffs.
Anyhow, the scene switches to highlight Wade's personality a bit. He's unapologetically himself. It's almost like he had the freedom to develop his individuality and communicate openly with others. Something that is new to Ember and something that she finds really interesting. She lets herself get swept up in Wade's personality a bit and begins to enjoy the moment. After things cool down, Ember reaches an agreement with Gale to fix a water leak to forgive the regulation tickets, which means that Wade and Ember will need to work together a bit more. And here we see the start of a new romance between Ember and Wade. A romance that was unexpectedly very well made, and a really cool way of illustrating the struggles of an immigrant and non-immigrant relationship. And I like why and how the relationship between Wade and Ember develops. They're initially attracted to each other's differences. Ember is initially intrigued as to how Wade is able to easily connect with the crowd and be himself without any hesitation. But as Ember comes from a more conservative family, she isn't comfortable at all in situations like that. And so they begin to share stories and talk about one another. Wade talks about losing his father, and Ember talks about the racism or elementism she and her father experienced when trying to see the Vivesteria flower, a flower that can thrive in any environment, even fire. And as there aren't many things in the city that are built for flame people, this flower was something that intrigued Ember. But because they weren't welcome in the garden, that experience was tainted for her. She finds it interesting that Wade is able to draw people in and connect with them, as she struggles with connecting with customers at her store.
How do you do that?
Do what?
Draw people in. You got a whole stadium to connect with you. I can't even connect with one customer. My stupid temper always kicks in.
I guess I just say what I feel.
And at this point in my head, I thought that her entire arc was going to be her learning from Wade on how to connect with people. But the truth ends up being way more reflective of the immigrant journey. They get more and more comfortable with one another, and that initial attraction and intrigue that they have for one another evolves into something more. They see each other more and more and sort of start dating. We see a really cute montage of the dynamics between these two characters. Wade being overly emotional and Ember being more hesitant, as the concept of love isn't that familiar to her. Ember was raised in an immigrant family by immigrant parents, and that parental love isn't always unconditional. There are sometimes a plethora of cultural expectations that need to be conditionally met for immigrant parents to fully love their children, which is actually touched upon later in the movie. And as a result, Ember doesn't know how to accept Wade's unconditional love at first. And I like how Wade goes out of his way to ease harder situations for Ember and make her feel more comfortable in this new world that she's beginning to understand. It's really cool to see how nothing really works out for them. They don't really fit and make sense. But Ember likes how Wade goes out of his way to make her feel more and more welcome. And in return, Wade likes how different, independent, and how special Ember can be when she opens herself up. It's been a while since I've seen such a pure love story in a movie, where we see characters trading glances, looking at pictures of one another, and organically becoming more and more comfortable. The relationship even affects Ember's temper, as she is more calm and at peace with the thought of Wade. It's a small montage, but it highlights so many things, like the differences between Ember and Wade as they date. Ember is forced to hide her love for Wade, hiding their pictures and lying to go out.
And since we're all good, I am also going away to do delivery.
Whereas Wade is open and calm with inviting Ember to his house, illustrating the difference between immigrant and Western parent ideologies. Ember is still scared to touch, not knowing what it'll mean, both physically and mentally not wanting to commit, as Ember and Wade aren't physically created to be together, exemplifying Ember's doubt in the relationship working out in the long term. We then see a powerful scene of her walking by a waterfall, wanting to make contact with it, to make their relationship mean something real, but just as she goes to do it, the waterfall, the dream, fades away, with the reality hitting her as her parents' shop comes into view. Ember's dad eventually catches Wade, and we get a cool scene of the first interaction between a father and his potential son-in-law, with some cool parallels to how immigrant parents may treat an outsider, with Wade being unable to fit in as he can't eat their food, but still making the effort to. The relationship gets complicated as the couple's differences are brought to light. Wade urges Ember to communicate with her dad, but Ember, being a second-gen immigrant, knows how high the stakes are in immigrant families.
It might be time to tell him.
Yeah, right. And tell him what? That I gotta shut down and destroyed his dream?
And I think this is a really important highlight of the movie. Communication isn't always simple in immigrant families. A person's character, reputation, and trust can all be tarnished with even the mention of an issue in immigrant families, and Ember is clearly aware of this. If she were to move forward and communicate with her dad, she risks letting him down and his health worsening. Wade doesn't get that in some immigrant families, what the child wants isn't always a priority. There are a lot of expectations that need to be met. The love isn't always unconditional. Being honest scares Ember, as it may get rid of the conditional love that she has with her dad. She is also burdened by the expectations put upon her in accepting her family's legacy, and she feels guilty because her parents did so much for her, leaving their families, enduring all that racism, all of that for her to throw it away.
You have no idea how hard they've worked or what they've had to endure. Family they left behind.
And I think this is where the main emotional hook of the movie is shown.
How do you repay a sacrifice that big? It all feels like a burden. How can I say that? I'm a bad daughter.
A powerful statement that every second-generation immigrant kid has asked to themselves. We're grown up hearing of the hardships and struggles that our parents went through for us, and thus, our struggles are minimized, and we are expected to repay the sacrifices our parents made in one way or another. The tax may be silent obedience or marrying by their choice.
Promise me one thing, Mary. Fire.
Or satisfying their wishes. It can get more and more complex. And Wade doesn't really understand this world, as he sort of represents someone who was born in the West. Ember feels more confused and guilty, as her dad tells her how much he trusts her, and how he's so lucky to have her.
I'm so lucky I have you.
The story moves forward and we meet Wade's more liberal Western family that is instantly accepting of Ember. The difficulties of Ember entering Wade's world is illustrated as she can't walk through his house of water, but Wade is the type to show continuous effort here and make it work no matter what. And the concept that I found the most interesting in this movie is how Wade's family are easy criers, which I'll touch on in just a bit. We see how Ember is accepted into the family pretty quickly, and how the family even push Ember to chase her talents. Wade's family cares more about individuality, whereas Ember's traditions force her to care about the bigger picture, her parents' shop, and her parents. She feels like she has to repay them somehow, and so chasing her passions and talents need to be suppressed for the greater good. And the crying game seems to be a comedic scene at first, but as I thought about it more and more, I think it highlighted a very important difference between second-gen immigrants and people that are assimilated in the West. Wade's family easily cries for everything and anything. They're pretty in tune with their emotions, but Ember is confident that she won't cry. Why is that?
Yeah, this is almost unfair because I have literally never cried.
I think that in immigrant families, crying isn't something that is always treated as sensitively. Immigrant parents mainly have that get over it attitude that has children growing up a bit less in tune with their emotions, which also explains why Ember is so hesitant to accept Wade's affection and love at the start. She just isn't used to these emotions, these unconditional emotions that happen without a reason. It goes back to my point on minimizing second-gen struggles, because first-gen immigrants have struggled so much that when their children cry on issues that seem small to them, they dismiss it and don't try and understand why they may be hurting. Being raised like this results in more thick-skinned individuals that don't really cry as much or feel emotions as much, because crying has a negative connotation in these families, which is all contrasted with Wade's family. But further, Ember stands confidently as Wade attempts to make her cry and nothing happens. But as Wade starts to confess his unconditional love for her, she tears up.
Ember, when I met you, I thought I was drowning, but that light inside you has made me feel so alive. And all I want now is to be near it, near you, together.
And this entire experience, meeting Wade's family, being recognized for her talents, being able to show her true self, all bubbles up, and she says the words that have been in her head for a long time.
I don't think I actually do want to run the shop, okay? That's what my temper has been trying to tell me.
She doesn't want to live for her parents' dreams, and her expression itself shows the guilt of her even feeling this way. And this is where I touch back to that arc that I thought would happen. You know, Ember learning to control her temper. But instead we're given a much more interesting arc that is relatable to any second-gen immigrant, being resentful and angry because of the expectations pushed onto her by her parents. And that's what Ember learns in this moment. She's angry at her situation, and she just isn't happy when running the shop. She feels trapped. We are raised to idolize our parents and make sure that we do everything we can to satisfy their needs, and it's such a big pressure, especially when we aren't able to fully express what makes us an individual. And this is what this scene says so effectively.
Even when I was a kid, I would pray to the blue flame to be good enough to fill my father's shoes someday, because this place is his dream. But I never once asked what I wanted to do. I think that's because deep down, I knew it didn't matter.
And we get the best line in the entire movie.
Because the only way to repay a sacrifice so big is by sacrificing your life too.
Her realization is something that is so relatable. The pressure and expectations have us losing our individuality, as we're raised to fit into our parents' shoes. She knew that there was no point in exploring her dreams and wishes, as she was raised to run the shop, and that restriction built up inside of her and was symbolized through her temper. Ember's parents aren't fully to blame here though, as they are doing the best they can, and the best that they believe is a stable life for their daughter at the shop. But Bernie and Cinder never once asked what Ember would be interested in, and that pathway and choice and that communication isn't always there for second-gen immigrants. It's more so a singular written path that we're sometimes forced to follow, and if we don't follow it, we're branded as bad kids or disappointments or the black sheep of the family. And that's what Ember is afraid of, letting her parents down and not meeting those expectations. And so the only option she sees here is to sacrifice her own life to repay the sacrifice her parents made. And just when we start to resent Ember's parents, we see Bernie and Cinder's side of the story, which draws so many parallels to real-life immigration. Essentially, Ember's dad performs the bakso, which is the highest form of respect in Flameland, but Bernie's father does not return the respect, leaving him heartbroken. It's a common misconception that people living abroad have, where they believe that those immigrating will lose their way of life, they'll lose their traditions and culture, and so they judge those immigrating and are sometimes even against the immigration. It's a really scarring moment for Bernie, and all of a sudden, they aren't the antagonists anymore. They're just so traumatized by that entire experience of packing up their lives and leaving their families, that the cycle of wanting to keep those traditions and cultures intact become a part of who they are. It's a driving force in their lives.
They never got to see all of this. They didn't get to see that I never forgot we are fire. This is burden I still carry.
But what Bernie doesn't realize is that his father didn't do the right thing in breaking his heart as he left to build a life in another country. Bernie thinks that he has to prove to his father that he did the right thing in keeping those traditions and that mentality intact. This can be connected to real life, as generational trauma is very real, and first and second gen immigrants are recognized victims of this. Many issues can easily be passed down if voices aren't raised on what is and what isn't wrong, and if communication isn't there in the family. And so Ember's father puts Ember in a really tricky situation. Does she satisfy her father's wishes and uplift this burden that he's carried for years? I mean, who is Ember to fight against years of generational problems, right? She must have to give up everything she wants because
the only way to repay a sacrifice so big is by sacrificing your life too.
And so, Ember goes to end it with Wade. She doesn't want to destroy her father's dream and trust. She is ready to sacrifice her wants for her parents. But Wade doesn't want to give up on them. He takes her back to Garden Central Station to see the Vivesteria flower, a place where Ember and her father were kicked out of because of them being flame people. The flower is able to thrive in any environment, even in fire, and I'm sure that's symbolism for acceptance. A flower that accepts Ember's element, and a flower that she can actually touch. And after showing Ember the flower, Wade extends his hand, and Ember is still hesitant to hold it. She believes water and fire aren't meant to coexist, and that the contact won't work, explaining her state of mind at this point, in which she thinks that the relationship won't work at all. But Wade is insistent on proving that it could work if she just tries, both the contact and the relationship itself. And as their elements touch, we see both in a state of equilibrium, both in balance with one another, happy that they both took that step and tried. However, as Wade says,
I'm so lucky.
She's reminded of her father.
I'm so lucky I have you.
That That guilt builds up inside of her, and she runs back to the shop. And here we see another clash of Western and immigrant ideologies, where Ember is reminded of her parents and what they want. The struggles they've taken are a priority to think about over Ember's own self-interest. But Wade urges her to think for herself and do what makes her happy, satisfying her self-interest. This quote explains it perfectly.
You've got an opportunity to do something you want with your life.
Want? Yeah, that may work in your rich kid follow your heart family, but getting to do what you want is a luxury, and not for people like me.
The burden of expectations from the generations preceding Ember numb her from her desires and restrict Ember from following her own dreams and passions. Ember's parents didn't get a chance to necessarily do what they wanted, as they were restricted by circumstance in leaving their homeland. And that is passed down to Ember, as she believes that since they didn't get to, she doesn't get to chase her dreams either.
You don't know what it's like to have parents who gave up everything for you.
A very powerful statement that expresses a double-edged sword, as on the one hand, that love and bond is so different of having parents who sacrifice their own lives so that you could live a happy one, but at the same time, it's constricting, as it means that the children need to own up to that and obey whatever the parents say. And thus, Ember isn't willing to fight the generations of expectations, traditions, and culture for Wade and ends it with him.
I'm fire, Wade! I can't be anything more than that. It's what I am and what my family is. It's our way of life. I cannot throw all of that away just for you.
I don't understand.
And that alone is a reason this could never work. It's over, Wade.
And so, Ember leaves Wade behind. She chooses her family over Wade and goes to follow the path laid out for her, sacrificing her wants and needs, as did her parents. The cycle continues, except this time, the sacrifice isn't born out of need, it's born out of expectation. And just as she's about to accept the burden, Wade appears and performs a really cool rom-com-y speech on how there's so many reasons why they can't be together, illustrating the issues in relationships where people come from different backgrounds, but Wade is sure that they fit and that they can work together.
There are a million reasons why this can't work. A million no's. But there's also one yes. We touched. And when we did, something happened to us. We changed each other's chemistry.
And just as things start to get heated between Wade and Ember's dad, Wade pushes Ember to communicate.
You burst the pipe?
Ember.
Silence!
No! Take the chance. Let your father know who you really are. You don't have forever to say what you need to say.
And as he confesses his love for her, she once again chooses her family. She doesn't feel strong enough to combat the stereotypes and generational expectations.
I love you, Ember Lumen.
I don't love you! Go!
And even after she does what she thinks is right for her parents, it's too late, and her parents are disappointed with her. And it's crazy to see the similarities here. You can do everything right your entire life, but the one time you mess up, you become a nightmare to your immigrant parents. A point that this movie highlights really well. All of a sudden, Ember is now a completely untrustworthy and unrighteous person.
I trusted you. You will not take over the shop.
All of this really gets to her,
Why can't I just be a good daughter?
as she fights to uphold her parents' wishes, but also wants to follow her dreams and desires. Things get out of hand as the glass holding back the water breaks, putting the entire flame community at risk. Ember puts her life in danger to save the remaining piece of home that her parents have left, the blue burning ember, as the store and everything the family has is washed away, symbolizing the incoming change. Wade comes back to help, and as Wade and Ember are both caught up in a bad spot, trapped by the world closing up on them, Wade sacrifices himself to protect the flame, a symbol of her family's heritage, and to save Ember as well. Ember finally gets a chance to tell Wade what she really feels, and that's what being raised in a conservative family does. It makes you hesitant to open up to love, and you only do it when it's too late. And Ember perfectly encapsulates that.
But I can't exist in a world without you. I'm sorry I didn't say it before. I love you, Wade.
Wade's sacrifice gives her that opportunity to fully present herself as honestly as possible, finally allowing that channel of communication to come to light.
I needed to tell you the truth. I don't want to run the shop. I know that was your dream, but it's not mine. I'm sorry. I'm a bad daughter.
And as Ember's dad sees her struggle under the burden of expectations, he lets go of his control and anger, and finally is just there for his daughter, unconditionally. It's so important to communicate and listen as a parent. Immigrant parents don't realize the power in all of that, but we have Bernie here who finally does.
Ember, the shop was never the dream. You were the dream. You were always the dream.
And of course, it's a Disney movie, so Wade condenses back into form. I personally think he should have died, but anyways, all is well for the family. Ember has finally come clean to her parents about who she is and who she wants to be. And as she departs on her journey with Wade, she turns back one last time and gives her father the big bow. A final moment of respect, a thank you to her parents to let them know that she loves them and she appreciates them for all of the struggles and sacrifices they took to get here. A thank you for the freedom to make these choices and pursue her dreams, finally breaking the cycle of generational expectation. And her father returns it, symbolizing his love and pride for his daughter. Bernie has broken the cycle as well. The immigrant struggle is one that needed to be explored, and Elemental does a great job of highlighting the gray areas in this experience. This journey isn't easy for anyone. Parents go through so much turmoil in leaving their homes, families, traditions, and cultures. Everything operates at such a big scale to them, and the stakes are always so high. And when the parents decide to have kids, they are scared of operating in this unknown world. The judgments of their families back home haunt them. They want to hold on to their roots, cultures, and traditions as best as possible, and thus try to raise their children with a tighter grip. They achieve all of this by trying to control their children and restrict them to a path written by the parents. And as a result, this frustrates the second-gen children as they aren't able to grow free, but instead are constricted by the burdens of expectation. And the issues that a child may face seem small to these parents that have gone through problems at such a large scale, thus neglecting the issues, dreams, and passions of their children, as the parents find them to be insignificant. After all, it's more than what the parents had, right? And this limitation results in the child's self-worth becoming attached to how their parents view them, and Ember gracefully exemplifies this entire journey and struggle. I love how the movie doesn't only critique on all of these factors, but also gives a lot of solutions and insights on how to fix these relationships. And I think it boils down to two things: communication and empathy from both the children and the parents, as once they are able to open up and weep together without minimizing either person's struggle, they are able to see the beauty in what can be. And so Elemental is a beautiful, relatable story about the journey of immigration and the burden of parental expectations.